All right, all right. How's everybody doing out there? Hope you're getting set up for a nice weekend. Well, welcome to this week's Griscom stream. We just recorded, Matt and I, a really great conversation with Brett Scott, author of Cloud Money, Cash Cards, Crypto, and the War for Our Wallets. Very interesting guy, really fascinating book. It will be released. The book will be released on June 5th, as will the interview for patrons. We'll hopefully try to get that out to the public, but until then, patreon.com/left reckoning to get into it. And as always, these are more casual streams, so feel free to jump into the chat with some questions. I'll try to answer as many as I can today. Miss y'all. I've been gone. I was out of town for the past week and a half. It's been nice. It was a nice trip, but happy to be back here. And yeah. Well, thanks, friend. Felt weird not chatting with y'all either. Davos Scumwad says, welcome back, Griscom. I felt weird without LR, but hopefully you feel rested, brother. I do, man. I had a really nice time. Hopefully, I'm trying to decide, because I've been feeling like the Tuesday streams are a little bit too close to the show, and sometimes it's hard for me to do both. So I might try to play around days. It's sort of nice to get to a different audience too. And thanks so much, friend. Phantom says, congrats on the engagement, brother. Thank you very much. Yeah, I did get engaged to my longtime girlfriend, but now we are official. Very excited for that. It's been really nice. We went away to rural Colorado for the week and had a really nice time. So I really appreciate the kind words from everybody. But yeah, I mean, there's a hell of a lot to start off celebration-wise. Why don't I pull this up for y'all right quick? So Austin, as y'all know, is my hometown. It's also where I live. And something very exciting just happened right before we went live today, actually. So as y'all know, there have been these really exciting union campaigns all across the country for Starbucks. And we've seen them pop up here in San Antonio, all across the state. But officially right now, we can say that 45th and Lamar, the Starbucks on 45th and Lamar, is officially the first unionized Starbucks store in the state of Texas. Thank you so much to everyone for all the support through our campaign. And it's just a really beautiful story. I mean, at this point, we know what folks are up against when they're running these union campaigns here and everywhere else. This one was one of those that's always really great too, when the vote comes out and it's overwhelming. I believe it was 11-1 in favor of unionization. And yeah, I mean, this is the momentum that we need to be seeing much more of, and celebrating as we can. As I say time and time again, look out. I'm sure that in your community right now, there are certainly going to be a couple opportunities to get involved and support, even if it's just showing up, doing the thing where you buy a drink and say Union Strong and tip them really nice on top of it. Yeah, it's certainly it's an exciting moment here, and I can't wait to hear more from them. I think it'd be great. I think we're going to try to reach out to them to see if we can maybe get somebody from the campaign on to talk about how they were successful in doing it. But from here to Denver to Pittsburgh to Tennessee, and yeah, we're seeing all across the country, which is really great. But yeah, I'd be happy to take some questions. I mean, I know I've been gone for a couple of weeks. There's a lot that's been going on, so feel free to jump into the chat with any questions. I'll keep the chat on the side as long as it's sort of feasible. But I'd love to hear what's sort of on y'all's mind. We talked about Uvalde this week, Matt and I. We also had Alex Press on the show. If you missed that, we released as a separate video. Her talking about the struggle with Dollar General workers, and got a lot of really exciting stuff. I think we're going to try to get the guys from American Prestige on, Derek and Danny, sometime soon too, this month. Really looking forward to this, May. But yeah, I mean, if we need to wait for some questions, we got plenty to talk about. I want to talk about some bad neighbors. And y'all know who I'm talking about when I'm talking about my neighbor here. None other than Elon Musk, who just a few weeks after hosting just like one of the most dystopian parties, his cyber rodeo here, has made a national announcement that he will be laying off about 10% of their workforce. Look, we know who Elon Musk is. We know how much of a cancer he is in our political system. We know how much damage he's doing to communities across the country. But the callousness of this announcement, just a couple of days after he released just the nastiest kind of message about working from home, where he basically was making it seem like all these employees, remember the employees who make him into one of the wealthiest people in the world, have been slacking off too much. And that they are going to be forced to return to the office no matter what their conditions are. If they have any kind of special needs, they will have to be reviewed by Elon Musk himself, which you know exactly what kind of intimidation game he's trying to play there. Well, he announced today that he is going to be laying off 10% of his workforce. And there's no doubt about this, by the way, that this comes off of the heels of his disastrous attempt to take over Twitter, the plummeting stock for Tesla, because the way that he's run his company is that it will do very, very well when the markets are flush with cash, cheap capital, right? Um, and are high on speculation. And as more and more people are starting to see the erratic way that he's governing his own company, and the way that he's acting publicly. I mean, this guy's been going through a meltdown publicly online for the past 3 weeks. If he wasn't such an odious person, I would feel bad about highlighting some of these meltdowns. But this is somebody who we have to talk about because he has immense amounts of power because of the amount of capital that he controls. And laying off people in any circumstances is terrible. But the way that he's gone about it, from one, starting out with a threat the day before to people about, oh, well, we need to, start putting some discipline in our workforce because people are basically sitting at home doing nothing. And all that super nasty shit. But also, don't forget the fact that this boy just moved his companies and many of his workers from California and New York to Austin, Texas. They came here because, one, the government here, Travis County, and the Del Valley ISD gave him one of the most criminal deals I've ever seen. We talked to Bob Label about that when he was running for Travis County Commissioner here. You should check out that interview. We really break down just the horrendous circumstances of that deal, which are basically a huge public giveaway to one of the wealthiest peoples in the world. And just remember this, like, people have uprooted their lives from wherever they're at. They move into Austin. They move into the surrounding suburbs of Austin. They move their families. They try to enroll them in school. And now they're getting a pink slip. All because of the fact that this guy is so horrible at managing this corporation that he will allow his unending desire, for personal internet fame, which is just so sad to see, frankly. I couldn't imagine being a rich guy like that and wanting to be beloved by like Redditors and Twitter users. Uprooted their life for this person. And then as stock prices start to fall because of how erratic he's been acting and the kind of shitty deals that he's been, I remember the Twitter deal that he negotiated was insane. They're getting pushback. And now it always goes to the bottom line of the working people and not to the guy at the very fucking top of the company. As Jules says too, and I appreciate the super chat, it feels like this country is about to get a whole lot darker. I mean, it's already been pretty damn dark. The bright spot is what we saw just now in the Starbucks here in Austin and all across the country as people are standing up and fighting back. The bright spot is the people fighting back at Dollar General and all across this country where workers are recognizing that things aren't going to get better until we start taking control of these systems. But yeah, there's no doubt about it. Why is Musk doing this? Because they're trying to hunker down they're trying to hunker down for what is very likely going to be a pretty serious correction that's upcoming as we start to see the Federal Reserve start to ramp up interest rates, which effectively sets the price of money in the economy. And for companies like Tesla, for companies like a lot of these other tech companies, it's very important for them to have this constant influx of cheap capital coming into their organizations. Because remember, its valuation is almost entirely speculation at this point. Yes, there's physical capital. They produce cars. They sell those cars. But compare the actual production of Tesla to Ford or GM or Toyota, it's laughable. It's laughable that Tesla is valued as the most valuable car corporation in the world when it doesn't produce, right? That's the kind of disconnect that you get when speculation and financial capital are dominating your society, and there's no um, real silver lining necessarily that financial capital is going to become weaker necessarily. But a lot of these companies are going to start coming down to earth. And then who ends up paying for the bill of this largesse? It's people who moved across the country to work for a deranged man, who are going to be given pink slips. And there's an entire, there's an entire ecosystem around these freaks that supports their decisions. Let me just put this up for y'all, and then I'll get to some of y'all's questions here. These people just drive me fucking insane. So this character, Sawyer Merritt, who runs a bunch of random companies that don't exist yet. But they're Tesla investors, so they have a lot on the line here to make sure that people aren't scared. Oh, this is the wrong one. Hold on one second. Sorry about that, y'all. Because the language they use is just, it's not surprising. It's the way these people talk about workers. Here we go. Apologize. I don't know if y'all can see that very well. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Ooh. Sorry, it's probably a nice shot for y'all. Nope. Fucking hell. Okay. On Musk's firing of 10% of their workforce. This is good for Tesla. In the past, there have been times when Tesla trimmed headcount by up to 10%. It was a good thing. Getting rid of excess fat, so to speak, and keeping things lean/efficient. Tesla always comes out stronger. So why should this time be different? And I respond, freak ass. But this kind of mentality, right? We were talking about the salaries that people are getting, which is nowhere near equivalent to the labor that they're producing for the company. You're calling people fat like that on an organism. This kind of naturalization of the corporation. And the underlying fact here is that whenever you hear little freaks like this talking about human beings as fat, remember that the fat on these corporations is not the fucking workers. It's the guy sitting at the top, and then these little freaks here who sit there and do nothing but sit around all day and try to bump up the kind of public perception of these corporations. Why? So that they can suck up excess capital from these corporations in the form of appreciation of their assets, in essence, their stocks, or potentially dividend payments, right? If there's any fat on this corporation, it's people like Sawyer, and not the people who are working hard to make that company function. Just absolutely nasty, kind of behind the scenes, mask off moment, whatever you want to call it, of the way that these corporations function, and the people who are trying to boost them, the way that they see people, the way that they see labor, as this kind of abstract, feelingless, needless process. Because for them, the only relation that they have to actual production is so tenuous and so distant from their understanding of the world that they just see line goes up, that's good for me, line goes down, that's bad for me. How can I make it so that people don't start selling off a bunch of shares in this company, which would then hurt me? Just the nastiest fucking people out there. And they're bad neighbors too, from what I've been hearing. We'll see. I'd love to get some questions for a little bit too, y'all. Let me see. Strom, when's the channel launching? We're looking forward to boosting that once it comes out. All right, here's a question, and I'll come back down. Actually, I'm going to come back to this. Let me not lose the thread here. T. King says, in the absence of a Federal Reserve creating a Volcker shock, Musk and other capitalists are doing what they can to wrest power away from an emboldened labor force. I don't think there's no doubt about that. I mean, that's what these layoffs are. But I think that I don't think they're going to. I mean, who knows? It's hard game to predict what's going on with the Federal Reserve. And as I mentioned in the post game this week, the signals that we've got from the Biden administration is that they're going to put no pressure on the Federal Reserve to make sure that the weight of these interest rate increases and Federal Reserve policy don't come on the back of workers. Biden has come out and said that he supports central bank independence, right? Which, remember, there's no reason. It's the same kind of fucking liberal delusion as when you hear liberals talk about the sanctity of the Supreme Court as a non-political institution. The central bank, or the Federal Reserve in our case, right, which functions like a central bank in this country, effectively controls the price of money. And that has extreme knockdown effects for all of us. And when those rates start to go up tremendously and quickly, the punishment falls on the backs of workers in the forms of losing their jobs, in the forms of having to pay higher interest rates on their debt, in the fact of them not being able to get loans because the interest rate is too high, right? The people who bear the brunt of huge rate increases are working people. And Biden is completely saying, I'm going to step back and let the pointy heads do their own thing, which is like the height of liberalism in the U.S. context, right? Saying, oh, you know what? These smart technocrats are going to take care of it. Despite the fact that we've seen throughout American history in recent decades that the Federal Reserve is completely unresponsive to the plight of American workers. The idea that we're in an inflation crisis because of wages going up too much is completely bullshit, especially when you compare wage increases to corporate profits over the past 4 or 5 years. And Biden's going to take a back seat and let the Federal Reserve punish the working class and basically be the hammer of capital, which it was always intended to be. And just on that, this is why, as it comes to most political questions. Sorry, I'm cursing too much, but as it comes to most political questions, the answer is democratization. And these things need to be much more responsive to us than they are to corporations. I mean, just look at the way that the Federal Reserve operated at the height of the COVID pandemic, right? They were much, much more reflexive and willing to take on the debts, for example, of corporations, to turn the flow of money from the Federal Reserve towards corporate America than there were any kind of real programs to the United States, right? We got from Congress these checks, which were very nice and helpful. They were nowhere near enough, but that's so paltry when you think about the amount of money that flowed in to corporations during the COVID-19 pandemic. Right. And that just shows that this financial system that we have right now is completely broken. And the only way to shift that is to demand more public oversight and more public control of these things rather than less. At a moment like this, it is absolutely irresponsible for Biden to be stepping back. There's all this workup about Trump when he was president because he was threatening the sanctity of the independence of the Federal Reserve, right? Because he was putting on very mild pressure on them, by demanding that they keep interest rates low. To sit here and think that this is a victory, that Biden in this moment is just going to let them do their kind of technocratic garbage that, again, is going to fall on the backs of working people, I think it's just absolutely despicable. So I think, let me see, I'm just trying to catch up with y'all. Strom says, I'll let you know as soon as I release a video, working on the first 2 right now. Hell yeah. Hey, man, I know it takes a lot of work to get these things out, but we're looking forward to seeing Strom's channel once it launches. Serious question. It's only Nicholas Rodriguez says, when was the last time you got a Pete Terry's? Also, congrats on the engagement. Thank you very much, Nicholas. Probably a couple weeks ago. I love my Pete Terry's. And let's see. All right. T. King also just on the Federal Reserve point. I'll just read this out. I mean, the Federal Reserve is supposed to keep inflation at 4.5. We're talking about unemployment, I think. not 3.6. They're going to try to create more unemployment, but COVID changed the labor market too much, I think. I mean, I think they're definitely going to try to create more unemployment because it's helpful for them. It's helpful for capital to be able to push wages down. Yeah, and that's the game. That's the kind of management of the economy that you get from up high, from the Federal Reserve, and that's why the only real solution to this. And it's like, people get mad at me because they're like, well, somebody could come in and really mismanage the system if you open this up to democracy. No doubt about it. There's no doubt about that in my mind, and I think it's important to remind folks that democratization does not always mean optimization. But what does it mean versus the system that we have right now? It means that the public, the people, have an ability to influence rather than the system right now where we have no influence. Right? We have no influence on the Supreme Court, frankly, right? Because it's so abstracted from your vote. Right? All of the rightward lurch of the court has happened. From presidents who lost the popular vote, right? So there's not a one-to-one connection there between, who's the president and who is on the Supreme Court, because as we've seen, the right is really willing to steal and to cheat in order to win. And so there's no guarantee, for example, that a more democratized Supreme Court is necessarily going to be more progressive, but it's the only way that will happen. It's the only way, at least, that we can influence it versus just sort of waiting and hoping that our unelected Council of Elders decides that they're going to be helpful. The same thing with the Federal Reserve, right? There needs to just be a lot more public control of these systems, because the way that they operate right now, they're much, much more responsive to the needs of the powerful and to capital than they are to normal people. But let's see. So we got a couple of questions on guns, and if people have follow-ups, why don't you jump those in? Just going to respond to this right now. Dialectics 1917 asked me if I had any thoughts on the interview with Voldemort Ishenko in the New Left Review. Found it very enlightening on the Ukrainian domestic politics and their relation to the current conflict. I haven't read the interview yet. I just got my New Left Review in the mail, but I'm looking forward to reading that for sure. But let's see. So we got a couple questions on firearms. So why don't we try to answer some of those. Now, we talked about this during the show this week. We're going to clip it, I think, and release it tomorrow morning. If you didn't catch it, we also have a clip of Michael Brooks talking about firearms. Davos says there's a tendency on the left to conflate healthy gun safety with banning guns. I haven't heard that talking point, but talk to us about democratic socialist lens on this matter. And I think somebody else asked a question on that too, so let me just pop that up as well. JT says, would Marx say, no, you can't take away any guns from the right-wing nuts? Disarming that population is disarming the proletariat. We must allow the 400 million guns or else slippery slope. Yeah, I mean, Marx, if people aren't familiar, has a pretty famous quote on guns. It's basically along the lines of, any attempt to disarm the proletariat must be resisted. And I think that on the general political sense, that's sort of where I'm at. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that there's things that we can do about the amount of weapons that are available, that are out on the streets, and certainly the caliber of weapons that we have. There's a few things here, and I think that maybe to start with the first question about what a kind of socialist approach to this would be versus maybe a liberal one, or just a statist approach, would be something that Matt has been very adamant about for a long time, is that you really need to start dealing with the manufacturers and the capital behind gun manufacturing at large. And think about this, for example. America has always been a country that has had a lot of weapons, right? But you've seen a shift, particularly towards the end of the 80s, and it really ramped up in the 90s, to this kind of military style weaponry. And where does that come out of? That comes out of a need of the arms manufacturers who have been manufacturing weapons of war versus home defense or hunting, to take those weapons and to find a market within the American public. And you see that literally, like, you go to any kind of gun store or anything like that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I think our audience might be split on their experience with guns in general. But if you know what you know what I'm talking about if you've been into any kind of gun store um, in recent years, right? There's a lot of kind of military style imagery, a lot of military looking equipment. Like, for example, like the AR-15. AR-15 is a gun that I very much despise. And like, I'll be honest, like, not only for what it's capable of, but the aesthetics of it too, I just find odious, right? Um, Personally, I would much prefer, just a classic rifle or a revolver or something like that. That's neither here nor there. But the point is that there is a huge market behind selling firearms in this country. And what the reason we need to focus on that is because what kind of weapons are being hyper marketed to people? It is guns like the AR-15. I remind people time and time again that the reason that the AR-15 is used in these horrible, um, spectacles of just violence and horror is not necessarily because they are the most dangerous weapon that's available, but it's because the AR-15 is the most popular weapon in the United States, which means that it becomes much more accessible for folks because it's just out there. It's out there at the store, it's out there at your house or your neighbor's house. And if you want to start doing something about that weapon, you need to start going towards the production of that weapon and who's profiting from trying to push that out into society. So yes, this is the NRA, but the NRA at this point is effectively just the political marketing lobbying arm of the gun industry. If you want to be serious about changing the kind of weaponry that's available to the public, at least readily and mass available to people, you really need to start coming at those industries at large, right? And that's where I think most of these measures should be focused on. It's on the manufacture, it's on the marketing, and on the sale of these weapons versus, for example, a blanket ban or a mandatory gun buyback program. There are more weapons in this country, and I think people know this, than there are people. I just don't see any kind. I don't think that that's something that I would support either. But even just on a question of viability, there there is not going to become a moment in this country. I can't imagine it, where there aren't plenty of firearms around. But what you can do is that you can start to shift the way that the gun market works. You can start to shift the weapons that people have versus this kind of chaotic anarchic system that we currently have. Again, we talked about this pretty deeply. It was like an hour long thing on Wednesday. So I highly suggest people who are really interested in spending some time on that go there. I'd be happy to answer some follow up questions if people have them or responses to that. Um, but I do think that you really need to start on that level. Secondarily, I think that one thing that you need to be cognitive of thinking about when you're talking about weapons in this country is what things that you're banning and how that's going to be enforced. Because people sometimes have a misnomer of who it is who owns firearms in this country. Because of course there are the people. I was on vacation last week, so I didn't catch where all this stuff was coming. But some photographer went around and like interviewed gun nuts, and they laid out all their firearms on their property. Nasty stuff. But you have to categorize these people. These guys are just psycho enthusiasts that are created because there's a market for being a psycho enthusiast. And again, this is something that comes out of the 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 marketing arm and the general market of firearms in this country. And of course, these people are not innocent. They play a very important role because I think most people do. For example, like here in Texas, we have constitutional carry, right, where you can get a handgun without even having a permit. Almost everybody thinks that's insane. Even Texans think that's insane. You look at the polling; it's highly unpopular. It wasn't something that was coming out of like a general public demand for this. It was coming out of an extreme fringe that either for direct financial reasons or because they have sort of been enculturated in this kind of hyper gun collecting mentality that they basically get to run cover. And of course, NRA plays a huge role in this by lobbying politicians to do things that are much more reflective on the market interest of the NRA and its major donors versus the interests of the general public at large. I'll remind people too in Texas, some of the first laws that were put on the books in this state we're limiting people's ability to have firearms out in public. So when you hear these kind of Texas Republicans go on about, oh, we're returning back to our roots, America used to be a free country, we lost our way. That's complete bullshit. They are rewriting history and they are creating a whole new era for the state. Imagine the Wild West kind of Texas shit. Even back then, they were like, no, we don't want to have people brandishing firearms in public. Not allowed. We're not going to have that shit. And it's only in the 2000s now where that's starting to become the norm here. And I think that, addressing that is important. As to like reforms, we broke it down on the show. I'm for, you know, wait periods. I'm for some magazine restrictions. I do think that a lot of times people put too much hope in those, what they will do. But at a certain point, it's just like, if that helps out a little bit, it's worthwhile. It's not a huge inconvenience for people who buy and use firearms. So no sweat off my back. When it comes to retroactively making weapons that are already out there illegal, I think that could get really dangerous really quickly. If you look at the state of policing in this country, you look at what happens to people who even have firearms under legal means. You start to take a lot of weapons that are legal for people to have and you make them illegal. That is only going to create a crisis of over policing. And it's going to be an over policing of poor people, working people, and people of color. There's just no way that you can look at the current state of policing across this country, and particularly in the South, and think that that's not going to happen. The big one is moving it up to 21. Generally, age restrictions, I just think that, if you're a full citizen of this country, I've always felt that it's sort of absurd to start to take away rights from a segment of the voting population. I can be convinced on this, not something I hold on super hard to. I think if you were to try to make that the most practical thing ever, I think 19 makes a little bit more sense. Because at least, at that point, people are out of high schools, because effectively that's what I think they're trying to stop. But remember that the median age of shooters is 30. So it's not going to be the kind of panacea that I think some folks think that it is. But let me see. I think y'all have been commenting here. I don't want to just ramble on too much. I guess someone else has mentioned Bo. Yeah, I've read some Bo stuff. Or listened to it. I guess. I think most of his stuff's pretty good. I mean, I agree with him generally on the marketing thing. I do think that you need to start coming after the manufacturers a little bit more directly. But I agree with him on that. He really pushes the domestic violence thing, and I totally agree. I think that, like, if your number one goal is stopping gun violence, making it so one strike rule with domestic violence, meaning if you get charged and convicted of domestic violence, you forfeit your right to own a firearm in this country. I think there's no doubt about the logic there that would that would end, or at least prevent a lot of gun violence here. But at the same time, these things are reflective of the current legal system that we have and the policing system that we have. And again, I'm not saying these things to say no, as much as it's like, I get worried. I don't think that we have, for example, the political constituency in power right now that's going to be able to do much on this. I think that they can be doing a hell of a lot more, and Biden does control the federal government. And I think that there's a lot of common sense things that they could be pursuing today. But I get worried sometimes that, similar thing with like climate change, which, like, we got to do something, that sometimes people aren't really interrogating what the doing something is going to be. And again, I don't think that people who are wife beaters should be having weapons, but I also know in this country who gets charged with those things and who doesn't, particularly poor people and Black people. And you have to be able to incorporate that into your calculus as well. I think that unfortunately these issues bake in so much shit that it's hard to always isolate them. So I don't know. I'm not saying no to domestic violence. I think that, sorry, I am saying no to domestic violence, but I'm not saying no to domestic violence, a charge immediately disqualifying you from firearm ownership. But I also think people need to understand the actual existence of the current state of affairs right now, as to who is going to be targeted with these things. I'm going to start just running through these questions and comments too, y'all. And I just saw this at the top. M. Kufe says, aren't most cops domestic abusers? Yeah, no doubt about it. They probably shouldn't be having firearms. JT says, I think we can lead the gun conversation as communities and leftists and also not fall into the disarming the proletariat. We got to give past to localities owning guns while also fighting industry. I agree with that. I also think that plenty of people in this country have owned firearms responsibly. And when you're talking about doing something about the epidemic, right? You're talking about there are two different things that we're talking about. There's the spectacles and the horrors of the mass death, right? That happen. And then there's the much more prevalent problem. And I'm not saying that that's not a big problem, but, statistically as to who's getting affected by that, compared to just general gun deaths, right? Those are two different problems to tackle. And they have different solutions, in my opinion. So I think it's always worthwhile remembering what you're getting into. Spin Me a Sailcloth says, ask me about a new rifle that's being given to our military as their new standard. What happens when the new deadlier weapon becomes more popular because of its affiliation with the military? Well, that's I'm not familiar with this rifle you're talking about, but I mean, that's the problem with, for example, if you were just to ban the AR-15, again, the reason the AR-15 is used is not because it's the most deadly weapon available. It's just the most popular, most accessible one. So there's no doubt about it that unless you do a kind of blanket ban that goes up, to cover a lot of weapons, you could create a really perverse situation where we spend a shitload of political capital, a lot of organizing effort, and then the problem just gets replaced with the new weapon, right? And Strom is very true about this. The reactionary thugs will not voluntarily surrender their guns. No doubt about it. Sune says, honest question, how much of the proletariat is armed in the United States? I mean, I don't have the stats like that available to me, but I think it's very true, and it's a point that's worthwhile making, is that, guns are expensive, and the people who have these big collections, they tend to be rich. But firearm distribution in this country, obviously, it correlates with the state that you're living in, and rural communities. And I think a lot of times, because the loudest and the most visible people out there who are firearm owners are the kind of weekend warrior gun freak types who are, again, pure creations of the marketing of the firearm manufacturing industry. It starts to flip the public imagination of who out there has weapons, right? Let's see. Jay Stack says, I appreciate the super chat too. Says, thanks for everything you and Matt do. I appreciate and enjoy the content. Well, we really appreciate all of y'all tuning in. It means a lot to us. And mods are one of the things that are difficult. It's easy to modify an AR to full, and it's easy to get a 30 plus mags. And I totally agree with that. I will say, like, the thing that gets difficult too when you're regulating technology is the ability to fabricate these things at home is not out of question for folks. But that being said, when we're talking about these mass casualty like shooting events, most of these guys aren't particularly technically savvy. Their ability to buy something that's pre-made versus constructing something at home, it's a huge problem. And as Jules says, exactly, Philando Castile did everything right, yet it didn't end well for him. Yeah, and we see that all the time in this country. Legal firearm ownership really seems to be limited in practice when it comes to the violent police state that we live in. Schultze says the gun culture is insane. And I don't like these people anymore. To be honest, I actually feel safer without them. I mean, gun culture in this country is absolutely off its rocker. I mean, I told this story when I was on the program with Matt that I remember buying ammo at a gun shop a few years back, and some guy was going on to me trying to upsell me hollow point bullets. Which basically are going to expand once they go through the first layer of the target. Very, very violent weapon. It's not for really self defense, um, or certainly not for hunting. It's for killing, and it's for killing very violently and potentially many people. And the implication there too is just that, those guys in the city with their big coats, right? You all know the kind of conversation he was trying to have with me. That shit is not a anomaly. That's baked into gun culture in this country. Yeah, and I mean it's truly horrific. Hmm. Well, hell yeah, we got Canada in the chat. Optimistic Avocado says, "Hey David, you're very optimistic if you're in Canada. Hey David, I love the show. Been a long time listener from Northern Alberta. Really happy to have you here." Well, a lot of y'all, I don't know if I could share some of these on YouTube, but yeah, I mean, again, like there's no doubt about it that the gun culture is out of control, and I don't know like the first answer to that. I know people have created parallel organizations like Socialist Rifle Association. Um, I think that finding something that could do what the NRA used to do, which was provide basic gun safety training to people, um, building something out like that would be helpful. And I know there's a lot of groups that have tried to do that. I don't think you're really going to be able to get it until you start getting into the marketing budgets, um, and putting some restrictions on certain on production of certain items. If like this is not just related to guns. This is related to everything in this society. That the government is very, very worried to sort of get involved with trying to lead production in any way. And this is the kind of chaos that comes out of it, right? Where you have a gun industry, their number one goal is profit. So they want you can sell. I mean, you can get like a decent handgun, for example, for around $1,000, right? You can get them for even cheaper, but they're not very reliable. You want to sell somebody something like an AR-15 for 3 grand plus, and then say, "Oh, well, you need this scope, and you need this magazine clip, and you need all these different accessories that go with it, right?" And why? I mean, I think most people who say like, "Why do you need that?" It's a very valid question. Well, the reason why it exists, the reason that there's a market for it, is because there's profit in it. And until you start to address that, all of these other knockdown effects from the marketing, from the culture, they all flow out from that river. Um, and on the state level, Texas is now producing more weapons than it has in the past. A lot of the, because most of the gun manufacturing used to be sort of headquartered in the Northeast, but a lot of those companies over the past 15, 20 years have started to move south because they're starting to see the writing on the wall in the Northeast. And they're doing that because they're worried about state level regulations on those companies. And in the absence of national, it's going to have to be state. There's a lot that you can definitely do there if you want to start addressing it. The tactical stuff, which people are mentioning in the chat too, is obviously a huge problem. But again, that comes because it's the same shit with Bitcoin, right? It's like you want to create a market, you want to create a bunch of people who want to take photographs and to be seen as these kind of characters. And until you address that profit mechanism and the marketing mechanism that comes out of it, in the absence of just a huge ban, you're not going to get very, very far. And this is an important point too from our friend in Canada. Um, I'm from Canada, and it's just so amazing to me that countries so similar have different cultures surrounding guns. Many people where I live own many guns, but we don't really have the same violence. And America is unique on this, and I think that it's very worth recognizing this. I think a lot of people make the point that, and I don't think it's out of bounds, that if you have a country that has created not just industry but an entire culture around empire and war abroad, it's not surprising when that stuff starts to come home. um, Let's see. I'm sure we're going to get more gun questions, but we'll take a little break with this one. Dakota asks, do you think grapefruit zest could be a good addition to barbecue rib sauce? I think that sounds nice. Only thing to think about when you're using a zest in a, or I guess if you're using the sauce after the fact, it won't be a problem. But if you're putting it on the smoker, just be worried that it might start to burn and get a little nasty. No, and no doubt about it. Once the 3D printing starts to really blow up, um, the ability to manufacture guns at home is going to become a huge problem as well. Troll Whisper says, biggest request I get in my rural community is 3D printing new mags because I'm the only one with a 3D printer. Let me see. I'm happy to keep talking about guns, but we could also go on this for a while. People have other questions too. I might prioritize those just so it's not too one topic today. Nicholas notes that they've gotten a gun background check every time. I feel gun control overall, its ultimate system of whiteness or privilege, its history is steeped in racism, sexism, and classism. There's no doubt about that, in my opinion, and that's some of the worries about some of the new restrictions that people are putting forward is that who's going to be caught up in these things and who isn't. Matt Leck is on the show, but he's not on the Griscom streams. These are solo. What do you think the best way to organize against gun manufacturers would be? I think that there's plenty of organization and anger about this. I think the question is directing it. And you need to start directing it at the corporations themselves rather than at the individual level. I mean, just to put this up very clearly philosophically, like somebody asked me, like, what's the difference between a kind of socialist perspective on this versus a liberal one? And like a liberal one is very much going to be focused on the individual, right? So it's always going to stop at the point of purchase or at the point of possession for a person, while a kind of more socialist or socially minded philosophy would be focusing on the actual production itself, because that's what creates the weapons that are out on the street. You can call me that if you want. All right, let's see. Grill don't kill, barbecue for peace. There we go. I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head what Bernie said on background check. So if you remind me, I can comment on that. I think that especially in 2016, they were really trying to harass Bernie about his very common sense approach to weapons. I think, and I very much appreciated that Bernie was able to be the spokesperson of this kind of growing democratic socialist movement, and not somebody who might be a little bit quick to sort of condemn everything. Oh, that's good. Dakota says, my band has a song about barbecue and really want to put on a show where we smoke and serve ribs while we're performing. Our band has grapefruit in it, hence the grapefruit zest question. Hey, I mean, I think that sounds super good. Like, I don't know. Loosely, I don't mean to say anything about the culture. People don't get mad at me, but loosely kind of like Latin or like Cuban rub on your ribs with a nice, like zesty grapefruit barbecue sauce sounds really damn good. I'll just say that there are different reasons why people Lenny says, I don't understand why some U.S. leftists have a problem with gun reform, especially the U.S. left. It's not like we're going to do armed revolution anyway. Well, let's, on the last bit, I'll just say this, that it'd be a misreading of history to think that having arms with working people is not helpful in a situation like that. But that's neither here nor there. What is more important is in the context of over policing in this country, in the context of people's lives being threatened by a very, very seriously growing fascist right presence, um, and in the context of how many weapons are already out and in the possession of working people, it is a very serious class issue to question how the state is going to relate to people's lawful possession of firearms. And you can, I'm sorry, like you already see um, one of the number one pretenses that police use to abuse poor and black people in this country is saying that I think that they had, a firearm on them, or I think that they might have had an illegal firearm with them. You need to understand that this shit all gets rolled up, together into the over policing question, and you can't separate these things. I think that that'd be a mistake to do it. And so, apart from just like philosophical perspectives, is do you think that free people should be able to own firearms? Um, and for personal safety, hunting, etc. Also understanding that what is the kind of enforcement mechanism of these things going to end up being for folks. We got good rib chat here too. You could always finish the ribs with a quick flash on the grill after hitting them with said grapefruit zest. I think I always suggest putting your ribs back on for at least, like, if you're using like a smoke or something like that, maybe like 3-4 minutes. Definitely. I totally agree with this. Too, Andrew says they're behind a little bit. The gold standards for countries with lots of weapons needs to be mandatory free use and handling courses. No doubt, in my opinion, because again, oftentimes when we're talking about weapons in this country, what people are talking about is like these horrible, horrible shootings, and addressing that, I think, is going to take. I think guns and the weapons that are available to people is a huge part of that question. I think that running away from that is cowardly and intellectually dishonest. But there's also a context in which these happen, and the desire to murder children. You have to start addressing where that shit's coming from. So that's on the mass shooting thing. But when we're talking about gun violence and gun death in this country, more often than not, it's misuse of firearms, suicides. And dealing with serious gun storage in this country is a huge, I mean, unfortunately, I think people probably know families that have had a tragedy because a gun was misplaced or was not put away and secured safely. Making that kind of training mandatory, I have no problem with that at all. Hmm. Hunting and the working class go hand in hand. Definitely a lot of the country. Well, thank you, Lexi. I did get my hair cut. Wait, before we go to that, I'm sorry. MDR, what's this? Kiwi fruit is a natural, neutral tasting tenderizer of meats, but find a way to get rid of the tiny seeds after marinating. Is that an Australian thing? I've never heard of that before. A friend in Canada says, I live in a very conservative area here in Alberta, and even though I work for a public sector union, many of my coworkers buy into the anti-union propaganda, even though they benefit from it every day. I mean, I don't know what industry you're working in, but here in Texas, we're seeing a really frightening uptick of protracted war against unions in the oil and gas industry. There was like a 9-month lockout in Beaumont, Texas, and an almost successful decertification campaign. The right has been very, very effective, especially in the energy industry, at taking forced austerity of the companies and the failure of many of these unions to basically be able to negotiate better contracts as a way to create an even worse situations where people are no longer represented by a union. I don't have the quick answer to how to fix that. It's going to have to come out of a much more vibrant, I think, national and global union movement. But yeah, there's no doubt about it that in a lot of these areas where they've had unions for 80 years, 90 years, and in Texas, for example, they're more of an anomaly. Um, that yeah, it's they're getting a lot of space to say you need to get rid of the union contracts in order to increase your wages, which is bullshit on its face. But it becomes a little bit easier to make that argument when these unions are sort of forced, often by conditions not of their own choosing. Don't get me wrong, but to take worse and worse deals year out. Um, it's certainly alarming, and I think apart from what you can do individually within your union and your community, I think that the left needs to get a lot better, particularly on the local level of showing up and showing support for these organizations. Hmm. Well, there's no doubt to this. The answer to this question: have we reached a healthy middle ground between freedom and public safety in relation to firearms? No. Um, could Matthew McConaughey win the governor's race on a gun reform platform? Well, I don't think Matthew McConaughey has very much political talent. He's a waffler. He was a waffler when he was exploring his run for governor. I like Matthew McConaughey as the cultural figure that he is and his association with Texas football, but no, I don't think he could. I'll tell you this. I said this during the show though yesterday, or on Wednesday, that there's that quote of Beto saying he's going to come for your AR-15s. Hell yeah, we'll take your guns. There's no doubt that that was going to be playing 24/7 going into the governor election here. I don't think that ad is going to hit the same. People might still not want to vote for Beto, but I don't think that's going to be treated as extremely as it would have maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago. All right. Shit, y'all, time flies. It's only been an hour. I can maybe take one or two more before we roll. All right. Look forward to our conversation with Brett Scott on why we need to have cash in society and really breaking down the war on cash, led by finance and led by fintech, financial tech companies. It's a very, very eye opening conversation. I think it's something that has sort of been missing from a lot of people on the left because there's so much that it touches. It touches your personal privacy. Um, it touches our reliability. For example, things, moments when the power comes out. But even more importantly, it's about finance trying to be able to control every kind of transaction that happens in society and globally now, right? There's this big push for banking the unbanked. And certainly you want people to be able to receive money and you want them to be able to buy goods and services. Remember that a lot of times these conflicts are created by the financial industry, basically wanting more and more customers to be banked with them. And anyway, it's a very interesting conversation. That'll be up for patrons this weekend. A friend here says, the union I'm in is somehow split down the middle between Trumpers and Bernie socialists. Don't underestimate people's desires to infiltrate your union who don't uphold its beliefs once that living wage is in place. Matthew McConaughey definitely came off like, I'm so lonely, please let me on the news to just chat. I think he definitely was having a hard time during the height of COVID. Well, I'm really happy that you made the stream too, friend. And yeah, y'all, I think I'm going to roll. I got some things to get into this weekend, but coming up Sunday will be our conversation with Brett Scott. Hopefully we're going to be doing a nuclear episode this week. Hopefully we're going to have our friends on from this month. Hopefully we're going to have some of our friends from American Prestige on. As always, appreciate y'all. Feel free to reach out. Congratulations to our friends on 45th and Lamar here in Austin, Texas, the Starbucks there, which organized the first Starbucks union in Texas by a vote of 11-1. And as always, y'all, take care of yourselves and feel free to like and subscribe. It always helps us out. All right, take care.